so I'm going to introduce you, Stephen Adams, your moderator, partner, producer, Buffalo 8. He's going to introduce our special guest.
It's my pleasure to introduce our subject today, Anthony Russo.
August 11th from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
Comparison with a few details. Anthony's one of the leading directors and creators of the entertainment industry today. His brother Joe Russo directed the record-breaking film Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War. Avengers Endgame is the highest-grossing film of all time, bringing in $2.79 billion. The Russo's Avengers Endgame has broken over 100 box office records, including the best opening weekend of any movie in history, making over $1.9 billion internationally, obliterating their own record set with the Avengers Infinity War. Other directing credits include Captain America Civil War and Captain America the Winter Soldier. They are also the creative minds behind critically acclaimed television series, including Arrested Development, Community, and Happy Days, directing their pilots and making their creative signature on many other episodes as well. In early 2018, the Russo brothers announced their new studio, Agbo, an artist-led collective focusing on creating global content for film, television, and digital platforms. It's headquartered in downtown Los Angeles, and it aims to nurture talent and create best-in-class family and prestige content. In addition to their film and TV successes, they're also co-founders of Bullet, a creative studio centered on the creation of branded great entertainment and advertising content. So that's a lot of stuff, man. I don't know how these guys do it. We're going to find out. Please welcome Anthony Russo. Good morning. It is a pleasure to have you here. I want to start at the beginning. Since, we're going to build our way up to these incredible credits, but let's start at the very, very beginning. Before even Pieces, you switched from studying business into studying English, and then in grad school you began to work on short film. How did that come about? When did you get the storytelling bug?
Joe, I think, just growing up, it's the specifics of your sort of childhood and your family situation. My brother and I grew up like in a kind of a large Italian-American family, extended family, so there was a lot of personalities, a lot of people, a lot of storytelling around the table on Sunday, so I think that's really where it started. And then as far as my history, our family was very involved on a local level in sort of political issues and causes in Cleveland, and I sort of enjoyed that sort of social process as a kid and was involved in a lot of different campaigns and stuff like that. And then I think, I was kind of contemplating perhaps going into that field, as an adult for a while, and that's why I was kind of toggling between those two things. I didn't really, my brother and I grew up film geeks. We loved film, we loved television. We grew up near the Cleveland Cinematheque, which is an amazing art house theater. So we saw, we loved big commercial movies, we loved really obscure art house stuff, global cinema, TV, but we weren't messing around as filmmakers as kids. It was just as film geeks. It wasn't until our early 20s that we started to think about filmmaking, and that basically was because of Robert Rodriguez and El Mariachi. So he made that film, and he wrote a book about how he made it, and he said that he made it for $7,000. And that lit a light bulb off in our heads. It never occurred to us you could make a movie for $7,000. All of a sudden it seemed somewhat tangible. And that set us on a road of just figuring out, taking baby steps, reading a lot of books, finding anybody in Cleveland we could who knew anything about filmmaking. And eventually we wrote a script together, figured out how to shoot it, and made a very, very low budget movie that ended up making the festival circuit.
And this was not a film school process. This was you guys just figuring out your process organically. How did what was the inspiration for Pieces, and how did that come together?
That was just basically again, it was us figuring out like how you can make a movie with nothing. And we had a very colorful uncle who ran a hair salon, and we just basically, came up with a story set in his hair salon, and we took over his hair salon for a month. He would stay open all day, and we would move in at night, and we'd shoot all night in the hair salon, and then we'd have to have it all put back in order in the morning. And his workers would come in, and they'd get angry because Everything wasn't put together properly. And that was basically about a whole month. So that's how we shot the film.
So that's like the perfect example. So use what's in front of you and make fun of your damn family. Why not? So, this wound up going to Slamdance, and then you came to the attention of someone named Steven Soderbergh. How describe that experience? Because going from the Midwest to a festival in Utah, and then this major name in film discovering you, what was that like?
That was pretty amazing. I should say that we did have a brief stint in film school after we shot the movie. We figured out we kept running out of money. It took us like 3 years to shoot the movie, and then we were done with it. Had shot it. We're like, what do we do now? We're like, oh well, do we go to New York or LA and get jobs in the movie business? Do we go to film school? And film school seemed a little more appealing because we knew that we could have access to student loans. Our big challenge, like completing the movie, was just getting more funds, and then also editing equipment, but that was less important as it turns out. So I briefly, and we didn't really know what we wanted to do. This was like the late 90s when this whole indie phase was going, so we didn't know whether we should go to New York or LA, so I ended up going to film school at Columbia in New York, and my brother came out here to UCLA. We spent about a year and a half in film school, during which time we finally finished up our movie. And then, yes, it got into Slamdance, miraculously. The road to Slamdance was, there was a film market in New York called the IFFM, and it runs out of the Angelica in September, and we went there. You just pay a couple $100 and you can bring your movie to that. So we had a good friend of ours who was running like the graveyard ship at this big printing company in Manhattan. And we went there and we printed up all kinds of materials and flyers and mailers, and we emailed everybody around, and we filled our theater at the Angelica at our market screening, and they warn you they're like, this is not a festival, this is a market, so there's buyers here, so don't expect, don't get nervous if people get up and walk out, they're not here to enjoy the film. Once they decide that your movie's not for them, they go. So we had a filled theater, and I remember standing at the back of the theater, and the movie starts, and slowly people start trickling out. So the place was almost empty. And literally one person stopped on the way out after the film was over. And his name was John Fitzgerald, and he was one of the 4 founders of the Slamdance Film Festival. And he said, hey, I dug your movie. I think you guys should apply to our festival. And they had just started the festival the year before. So we're like, great. So we got that one sort of ray of hope out of that IFFM experience. And then we went to Slamdance, and it was kind of a similar experience. We went there, we had a great experience. We had a bunch of friends and family members come from Cleveland to help promote the movie. We had really great screenings there, but again, the festival ended and there was no interest whatsoever. Until about a week after the festival, we got a call, and it was from Steven Soderbergh. He had seen our movie at the festival. His movie, Schizopolis, was opening the festival that year, and somebody had mentioned to him, oh, maybe you should check this movie out, I think you might like it. And then, oddly enough, our movie Pieces and Schizopolis are kind of like kissing cousins. There's a similarity in sensibility and tone and in them. So, yeah, so he called us up and we started to get together with him, and he ended up producing our next movie. So it was this really weird thing how there was just like one person at each moment that sort of provided a road forward for us, and that was very fortunate.
So there's an interesting lesson in that. All you need is one. And then, let's talk about the transition from making a short into your first full-length feature. What was that transition like, and how did you guys learn, how did you grow?
That's a good question. So the first movie, Pieces, that was 76 minutes, so it was kind of a tweener. I think it was technically considered, at Slamdance it was considered a feature. Then it took a few years. Basically, when we met with Soderbergh, he's like, what do you guys want to do next? We're like, we don't know exactly. We have a couple ideas, and he's like, well, you should start writing, because we had written our first film. So we basically went into a writing phase where we wrote 3 scripts over 3 years. And while we were just kind of working odd jobs and stuff. Then Soderbergh formed a production company with George Clooney at Warner Brothers when he was making Ocean's 11. And when he formed that company, the head of the company called us and said, oh, hey, Steven, has said that he wants to move other smaller movies through this company, not just making these big movies for Warner Brothers. And he said there's other filmmakers he wants to work with, and you guys were the first guys he mentioned. So we're like, okay, great. So we sent them the 3 scripts, and they basically read them, and Soderbergh was like, this one. So it was a movie called Welcome to Collinwood, and that ended up becoming our next movie. It was a smaller, I think basically he picked it because of the 3 films that we sent him. One was kind of a big historical epic, one was kind of like a sort of a big action film, and then one was this quirky comedy. And I think he felt like, back to your question, that was the easiest step for us to make from that small movie. You know, the other movies were going to be much harder to put together, to finance, you know, especially when the only person interested in us as directors was him. So he picked the smaller, more doable comedy, and that became our next film.
Can you describe for me what your working dynamic is like with your brother? How do you guys divide the labor? Who does what in these processes? Does that change sometimes?
Yeah, I think, it's funny, I think every filmmaking team works in a unique way, in the same way that every director works in a unique way. There's very different, it's all kind of a function of your process and your personality. So for Joe and I, we always like it when we have both our brains on everything. That's sort of our process. We have this very Socratic method with each other where we just point, counterpoint, all day long. That's how we saw through our ideas and what we want to do. And that's basically our process that we apply, from writing, producing, directing. But there's at times, of course, where we will, out of necessity, we will sort of divide and conquer when we need to, if it becomes like a logistical tool for us to get everything we're looking for. But other than that, we can kind of stick together.
I have a question about your transition now into television. I mean, what was that like, moving from film, which I guess maybe your dream all along, to move into a medium which at the time might have not been seen as quite as desirable? What was that like for you?
Yeah, well, this is a great question, because this is, it seems strange nowadays because what's happened with television, but this is back at the beginning of that process, and it was in the wake of The Sopranos changing everything on what was, what was possible on television, what you could aspire to on television. So we were in the edit room on Welcome to Collinwood, and it was right at the moment FX had just released The Shield, and the following season they wanted to debut a comedy, a similarly sort of aggressive, riotous comedy, in the spirit of The Shield, but as a comedy. And they had a script called Lucky, which was basically written by a pair of brothers named the Cullen brothers, and Echo and Cullen. And it was about a gambler in Las Vegas, sort of like a guy who had been a gambling addict, who had gone through an addiction problem with his wife. His wife ended up dying of an overdose. He was so broke and destitute, he had to borrow money from her parents to bury her, and this is the jumping off point for the comedy. So we loved it. We love very complicated tones, and so it was very exciting to us. And that was, so Kevin Riley, who was running FX at the time, somebody had told him about us, and he came in the edit room and watched a cut of Collinwood, and he liked it, and he hired us to direct that pilot, which was very fortunate. It's always great to get your next job before your current movie comes out, because that Collinwood we ended up making for $7.5 million, and I think it made about $350,000 at the US box office. So it was good to have a gig before that happened.
So always very good to swing to the next vine as quickly as possible. So talk to me about Arrested Development. I mean, I was saying to you earlier when we were talking that, I look at that pilot and I think, the signature for the show is in that pilot. You guys put your DNA into that thing in such a way that it carries out through every season, and then going on to direct really important episodes, seminal episodes throughout the series. What was that experience like?
That Arrested Development pilot was really us pouring all of our indie filmmaker energy into a TV show, and that's because that's what television was looking for at that time. So that pilot, Lucky, and even though the show didn't end up working for FX, that became kind of like an industry favorite. It sort of made its way around the industry, and everybody loved that pilot. And I can't tell you how many meetings we got off of that pilot. Everybody wanted to meet with us. And one of the some of the people who wanted to meet with us were the people making Arrested Development, Ron Howard, David Nevins at Imagine. And they had a really interesting pitch for that show. So Ron Howard was basically in a place where he was like, look, this was back when reality TV was kind of taking over the programming schedule. And, single camera comedies, basically, comedies, half-hour television shows that are shot as like you would shoot a drama, meaning they're not shot on a stage with multiple cameras with an audience. They're expensive to shoot because they don't cost half as much as an hour-long drama takes to produce, but they bring in half the revenue because of the advertising. So they're an expensive form of television, more expensive than dramas, more expensive than reality television, more expensive than multi-camera comedy. So Ron Howard's premise at the time was, look, single camera comedies are dying on television, and we have to find a way to revive them. His point of view was also at the time that he expressed to us was, the multi-cameras are getting stale, so how do we bring new energy into the television comedy so it doesn't get completely killed by reality television? And so it was interesting that they turned to guys like us because we were kind of had these guerrilla filmmaker energy to us. So we were like, okay, well, if we need to make it economical, if the problem is the show's not economical, well, here's how you develop a guerrilla filmmaking, indie filmmaking approach and do it. We do it like that was no one had ever shot, by the way, at that point. No one had ever shot a primetime network show on digital video at that point. So we're like, we use digital video cameras to bring the cost down. We light it like we shoot it like a mockumentary, so that the imperfections in the lighting, we don't have to like kill ourselves with lighting. We can actually make the fact that it looks like shit be a virtue because it speaks to the reality, the verite of the moment, which is something we wanted to chase with that show because the show is so absurd, so completely absurd. We wanted to like marry that with a really hardcore realism in terms of how we were shooting it, just because it was such a bizarre combination. But that was also an economic choice on our part to just figure out how do we bring the budget down. So we came up with a whole dogma about how we were going to shoot the show that had to do with like we were going to have a super small crew. All the actors were going to do their own makeup. We came up with this whole crazy dogma until we realized that you can't. There's so many restrictions in terms of requirements in terms of how people can work at a major network. Like all that stuff had to go away, and it became yeah, exactly. So it became more conventional, but the spirit of it remained. So that yeah, and again, the other reason we wanted to go with digital video on that is what part of our approach to comedy was. We like to keep. We're very performer oriented, Joe and I. We love actors, so we wanted to keep the camera rolling. And especially with comedy, it's so sort of quixotic. You just want to keep everybody on their toes. You want to keep everything moving. You want to let people go when they're ready to go. That's the way you bring the best out of a comedic performer. So the idea that we could just keep the cameras rolling and just burn them and burn them and burn them and wait till the right moments happened, that was really exciting to us. But there's also a downside to it. I should tell you a funny story we got. So because we were shooting like that, and the TV executives had never seen anything shot like that before, where you didn't have to be precious with wasting film. So we would let the cameras burn. We were shooting in documentary style. Sometimes we would throw two or three cameras in a room, and like some of the cameras, they had no shot for like 9/10 of the scene, and all of a sudden they would have a moment. Well, the dailies went into the network and they watched these things. And they called us the morning of the second day of the shoot, and they were like, "What the hell are you guys doing? None of this stuff's gonna cut together. What are you shooting?" We're like, "Oh no, you don't understand. You don't understand. It's not like a regular take. We're only using a tiny piece of what you're seeing." We explained the whole thing, but I think we almost got fired that day.
I'm glad they continue to trust you because here we are. And I'd like to learn a bit more about your other pilot experiences because each one of these is still, to me, they stand out so strongly even to this day. And again, I see these sort of signature elements that you guys bring to your work in everything. Can you talk a bit more about those other pilots?
Sure. Yeah, so it was, and I think that was part of the interesting thing of us starting as indie filmmakers is like we approached every TV pilot like it was a movie, basically, and it was basically, and we weren't, in our TV experience, we generally weren't writing the scripts, but you like a feature, you get a script, you have to figure out who you're going to cast, how you're going to design the show, how you're going to execute the style, the voice, the tone of the show, and you sort of you're building out this show that is going to be a template for continuing episodes. So our pattern with television became, and this started with Arrested, we would come onto a show, do the pilot, like we're directing a feature, and then we would stay with the show for a couple seasons as producers, executive producers, and direct many of the episodes and also help oversee the execution of the show. And that became our pattern. And we went through shows, many shows like that, Arrested, Community, Happy Endings. We did a variety of other shows as well. We had about 10 years in television where, and we got known for, like, we never, I think we put like 11, in 10 years we put like 11 pilots on the air or something like that. It was like a crazy, we had a really strong track record. I think there was one pilot we did that didn't make it to air, which was really unusual. So, but it became a very cool process for us. And the great thing, a lot of times my brother and I cite this adage, if you want to become a good carpenter, make a lot of tables. That's how you become a good carpenter. So it's like, it's the great thing about making television is like, as a director, is like you are shooting a lot. You are working a lot in a lot of different situations, a lot of different opportunities, and it really sharpens your skills. And I think for us, guys like us who grew up like film geeks and came to filmmaking from more of an academic point of view, that was really helpful to us because we hadn't been out there for years and years prior, like grinding on a craft level. And it really allowed us to really grind on a craft level. And we learned a lot during that period. And I think all that energy, all that knowledge that we gained during that period is something that we were able to then carry forward back into our feature career.
Which leads me to the wonderful world of Marvel, which I've been waiting to get into. That is a, when you talk about craft, I mean, these are films that are made both on set and also in post in a very, very big way. I think much more than anybody would ever even imagine in terms of visual effects and the marriage of visual effects and the strategies that go into all of that. How did you guys first confront that new terrain?
It's a great question because, there's sort of like a duality to it in the sense there. On one level, we always say like, we've shot movies for like as little money as you could possibly shoot them for as much money as you could possibly shoot them for. We've shot TV, features, comedy, drama, we shoot commercials, etc. So we've shot sort of any kind of format you can shoot, and at the end of the day, to us, it all feels the same. It's basically the same process you go through no matter what you're making. You have a conceptual phase where you sort of dream up what you want to do, and then you go through a practical phase and figure out how to achieve that. And the pattern is the same no matter what you're doing. But that being said, there are significant differences, and I guess the one difference was, again, coming from an indie film background where you had to be very precious with resources, moving into these really large-scale movies with huge budgets, where you basically, like, that was the big revelation when we got into post on our first Marvel movie on Winter Soldier. And the realization of like, oh, I'm in post, but I can still do anything I want. And I can still get the cameras back out. I can change anything I want. It's like that was a big revelation.
And those tools keep growing.
Yeah, those tools keep. I mean, it's really remarkable and amazing. And I think we were really energized by that because we have a really rigorous process every step of the way. We like the testings and testings and testings. So all the way through the script phase, all the way through shooting, and all the way through post. The editing process. We love tearing things up and trying it different ways. Because we have always approached it, you have one opportunity to make a movie, and it's like you want to explore every possibility you can along the way, bring everything you can into the filmmaking process that you can, and then decide what the movie wants to be once you've collected all that stuff. So it's really fun and empowering to be able to keep collecting stuff while you're in the editing phase.
Did the challenge of creating grounded performances in the middle of all the visual effects present any new problems or new opportunities for growth? How did that work for you?
Sorry.
I was talking about grounding
performance. Yeah. So the performance, this is a great question again because we do love actors so much. We're really precious about the performance process. And every actor is different. Every actor has different needs in terms of how they perform. we basically try, because when you're dealing with these big fantastical movies that have fantastic locations, and sometimes you're dealing with only a portion of the actual set, sometimes you're dealing with almost no set, and it's difficult for the actors. So what we do is we keep very focused on providing as much as we possibly can that's tangible and actually there on set for the actor to work with and react to and play off of. And a lot of times that's, it becomes very important, even if you're dealing with CG characters, to have those actors there on set, even though you're not using that performance that they're generating on set sometimes, to have them there to perform with the other actors. And in certain situations, with these films, you have a high quotient of movie stars in the cast, so sometimes you can't carry all those actors for run of show. So you need to, sometimes we'll have substitute actors come in and perform on stage in different roles that they're not actually playing, just so that we have, the most kinetic, energized sort of performance situation we can on set. And we're very particular about picking who those actors are so they're really delivering a good performance. But I think that's basically it, is just trying to fill things out. And it becomes challenging for the camera department as well, our camera operators, because we like a very active camera. We like a camera that is very, has a strong interplay with how the action is unfolding in a scene and how the choreography of the actors and all. And sometimes that becomes very difficult when part of the choreography that's happening within the frame isn't there on set. So we also get very particular about having playback available and support materials available there on set so that we can show our entire crew what is happening in the set, the fullness of the scene, so that they understand that they can use ships floating overhead or whatever kind of movement they may not be able to sense. They're aware of it, and we can figure out interesting ways to use it and dance with it as we choreograph.
I have another question too about the world that you're talking about, because not only is the filmmaking on another level, but there's also the promotion, which is also another level. You step into a global machine that addresses how to get these kinds of numbers. So what were those experiences like? Promoting film to the entire planet.
This is a great question. Because we knew how big these movies were, and we went through a very long process when we were being hired on our first movie with Winter Soldier. It took us about 2 months. The offer kind of came out of the blue. We just got a call from our agent that said, Marvel has a list of 10 directors they want to talk to about the next Captain America movie, and you guys are on it. Nobody, we had never sniffed that out or anything. I don't think anyone knew that we'd been lifelong comic book fans, or that, we had been planning to segue back in that. My brother and I had been, even though we were, during that 10-year run of television, toward the end of that run, we had really been planning to do a big sort of action feature. So this it all kind of lined up in a weird way. And, sorry, I forget where I was going. I got it super late on a plane last night, I'm sorry. Oh, the global promotions, yeah. So, and the size of the global audience, that's where I was going with it. So we fell in love with the idea of doing the movie. And we had to audition for about 2 months for it. It was a very hard audition process, but we won the film. And when they finally hired us, I didn't bring this up with them until after they hired us, but I was like, when they finally hired us, because I knew the expectations for these movies, how these movies need to perform in order to work. And I was like, you guys understand that my brother and I have never made anything profitable in our none of our TV, all our TV shows, Rust Development Community, none of those shows, they all got canceled for a reason. They weren't profitable. And our indie work was not profitable. So they were like, yeah,
It's actually very encouraging.
I needed that check-in. They didn't. I think they just kind of smiled nervously. That was it. But that being said, I think we were specially built for these movies in a weird way, and the fact that they have such a global audience is amazing. Really, all we could do. We learned very early in our career that you can't second guess yourself. You can't try to anticipate what other people want or what you're supposed to do. Like the second you start storytelling from that point of view, you're done for. So, we knew, because we had such a passion for the material, lifelong passion for the material, plus a very specific passion for what they wanted to do with Winter Soldier. We knew this movie was in our sweet spot. We knew we could kill it. So we just stayed very focused on what we wanted the movie to be, what movie we wanted to make. delivered that film. And then the fact that it worked was just, good luck, So, but I think that's how we began this sort of interaction with this global audience, because Winter Soldier did very well globally. It was a huge hit in China. All of a sudden, we were traveling the world, engaging with audience members throughout the world in a way that was really eye-opening and energizing. I mean, to be able to make a piece of material that was like pulling so many people together on every continent from so many different cultures, and everyone having the same sort of cultural experience together, that was really encouraging and energizing, especially in a movie like Winter Soldier, where we tried to lay in some really relevant political themes and some challenging political themes. And the movie was playing in countries where those political themes are even more relevant than they are here. So the opportunity to engage with the audience was really great. And by the way, it was kind of going back to our origin, because that's really what film festivals are all about, right? You bring your movie, you make your little movie in obscurity, you bring it to the festival, and all of a sudden you get to dialogue with other people about it. And that's the sort of high point of having made the movie, right? It's when you bring it to audiences and you feel what that movie means to audiences. So again, it's this, and then we sort of like all of our work has been in that spirit. We've always loved that dialogue about film, and I think again that goes back to us growing up as film geeks. We love the dialogue about films as much as we love making films. So the fact that these movies are such a significant part of like the pop cultural landscape, and there's so much conversation about them, is something that's really gratifying to us, and we love playing a part in that conversation. And we think that conversation is as important, and actually probably more important than the movie itself. So,
fantastic. I'd like to learn a little bit about Agbo and Bullet. Can you tell me a bit about both companies and the differences between their missions?
Yeah. So Bullet is a company we started first, and we started it with the filmmaker Justin Lin as well. And basically, what was happening we started shooting. It was funny stories, like when we after we won the Emmy for directing the pilot of Arrested Development. A commercial producer approached us and was like, hey, I can get you guys work in commercials off of this. And we were like, okay. And so we started directing commercials. And it was just kind of a side thing that it was never like a main focus of ours, but it was like a really useful dimension to our filmmaking efforts, because the nice thing about commercials is that they're short. They're a small commitment. And we love new technology. And we found commercials like a very useful format to test out new technology, because you didn't have to like get a huge studio to commit to an idea of shooting a big feature with this sort of new untested technology. You just had to sell a smaller group of people and with smaller stakes. So it was really useful to test drive new stuff. Again, where was I going? Oh, the other one, sorry. So Bullet. So as television started to move over to the internet, the 30-second spot started to go away, or the 60-second spot started to go away as the primary media sort of form of commercials. The commercial world evolved into more of what was called like the branded entertainment world, which was a more broad approach to how filmmaking, storytelling can intersect with specific brands, and how brands can sponsor different forms of cinematic expression. And so we basically wanted to get ahead of that whole curve, and we founded that company, Bullet, with that in mind. We wanted to be at the forefront of what are the possibilities now for filmmakers and storytellers, now that this sort of really strict 30-second, 60-second format is going away. And there's all kinds of new possibilities online in terms of how we approach this idea. So that's what Bullet is. And Bullet has been going really well, really proud of what Bullet's been doing over the past couple of years in that vein. Agbo is a more recent company that we've founded, and Agbo was basically founded off of the success of the Marvel run that we've had. And that is basically our TV and film studio. And it's a studio because it's a very well-financed studio, and we have the ability to actually greenlight our own movies. That doesn't mean we greenlight all of our own movies. We seek out co-financing on almost everything, but we can greenlight our own movies. And that is basically, we formed that company. We had such a great experience at Marvel working with Chris Marcus and Steve McFeely. Those are the writers who wrote every single one of our Marvel movies. They're also responsible for more of the MCU than that. And we had a really wonderful collaboration with them. And we wanted to sort of carry that forward. That same process that we had gone through at Marvel, where the four of us would basically get together, sit in a room for 6 months together and figure out what a movie was, and then sort of move on to the next one. That was a process we wanted to carry forward. So we formed a partnership with them and some other key people, and we formed AGBO, and AGBO's goal is to be very disruptive in the film and television space in the same way that was the goal with Bullet. Again, it goes back to our sort of, I think, our origin as indie filmmakers and that sort of like riotous sort of energy we brought to Arrested Development. We love sort of disrupting and finding new ways to do things. And so that's the goal of AGBO. We're going to be supporting a lot of filmmakers that we love that may not get through the system otherwise, like Soderbergh did for us. And we're going to be also making really global entertainment on the scale of Marvel movies. So it kind of runs the gambit.
Fantastic. So the next question for me is, how did these filmmakers approach AGBO? In the best and most respectful way, with restraint.
I have a bus outside, so if anybody wants to get on, we're good. So we have our offices. We set up our offices in an obscure area of downtown LA called the Fashion District. It's sort of this area kind of like southeast of downtown, main part of downtown, not quite the Arts District. And we wanted to set ourselves up outside of the normal sphere of where film companies are located, just in the spirit of trying to like set ourselves apart and do something different, think different ways. So we've got a lot of ways in. It depends on what you're trying to do, but we're a new company, we're getting up and running, so I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question.
Is there some executive's life we should ruin? Maybe that's the better question.
There's several. That's why it's hard to answer. There's several of them. We're a pretty big company, even though we haven't put out a lot of product. Our first big release is coming this fall with 21 Bridges that stars Chadwick Boseman. One of the things we've been able to do with AGBO is we formed such good working relationships with a lot of the actors that we've been working with for the past 7 years at Marvel that we're sort of rolling over. We're finding ways to move forward and work together. So Chadwick, we're producing this movie called 21 Bridges that Chadwick is starring in. We're producing another movie that Chris Hemsworth is starring in. It's going to be on Netflix, a big action film. Another movie that we're producing is the next directing effort that my brother and I are going to do. We're going to make a movie called Cherry this fall with Tom Holland. And there's other.
I started reading that script last night. It's crazy.
Oh, you did? Yeah, it's a crazy script. It's an amazing book. The book came out about 2 years ago by Nico Walker. Nico is an Iraqi war vet who wrote a novel/memoir about his experiences in the war, suffering from PTSD, being prescribed opioids, developing an addiction, that addiction snowballing into a bank robbing career, pretty successful gentleman bank robber career that ended in prison, and he wrote this book from prison. It's a really sensitive, kind of wounded soul story about how life can kind of turn in very subtle ways for the better or for the worse. And I think we wanted to make it now because the opioid epidemic is raging, and we've been touched by it on a personal level. So it's something that's important to us, and we wanted to use the book. It's a hard movie. It's hard to get audiences to want to watch a movie about opioid addiction and heroin addiction. But that's one thing that we want to use our platform now that we have with the success of the Marvel movies is to like bring attention to stories that are hard to get made. That's one part of our agenda. So I think Cherry's a good example of us trying to get a movie to audiences that they're going to want to watch that is also is also important on some level and relevant.
Thank you. And I think it's time to open up this moment to questions. Let's see, I think it's starting this way and moving our way forward.
Myself? Yes.
Yes.
Earlier on, when you were talking about Arrested Development, like when you sent the dailies in, they were like, "Oh my God, what are you guys doing?" Because they didn't understand the new way that you were approaching making this piece. I guess my question pertains to how do you mitigate between like the people that give you money or like the powers that be to be like, no, like, don't worry, we're doing something, it's really interesting and you're gonna like it, because like, how do you mitigate between getting to do what you want to do and also like having to deliver something to people that are giving you money that want to make a profit on it?
That's a great question, and I think that I think my brother and I have always had this kind of, I know a lot of filmmakers struggle with that issue. And I think my brother and I have always had kind of like a leg up on this issue because we developed and work as a team. Because when you work as a team, you have to constantly communicate your ideas to somebody else, you know, or else you can't work in a partnership. So like our entire process is constantly communicating ideas to one another. And we have to do it in a way where the other one understands. And it's, sometimes the other one is groggy, and it's hard to make them understand. Sometimes they're grouchy. Sometimes they just have some bias against an idea that, you know. So Joe and I have learned how do we reach one another with the ideas that we're passionate about. And I think that process has actually trained us to be very communicative with other people in the process, in terms of like pitching our ideas and making sure they see them and getting ahead of what the problems that can come from somebody not understanding what you're trying to do. So I think at the end of the day, it's really just, for us, I would say one way to do it, the way that's been useful to us is to try to be very clear and communicative about what you're doing, about what the movie's going to be, about what the show's going to be, so that there's no surprises when it comes. And now, and that's also where you figure out whether or not what you want to do is going to end up being useful to the people you're working with, right? Because if you're being very clear about what it is, and they don't like it, you know there's a problem. You know there's a problem before you've gone too far down the road. You know, but I think a lot of, you know, and some people that's a difficult process for, because a lot of artists have more of an interior process, especially when you don't have this pattern of having to work in a partnership with somebody, and it's harder to communicate what you're doing, what you want to achieve, and then there can be more surprises down the road for your collaborators because of that. So anyway, there's probably other ways to do it as well, but I would say for us, I think that's been effective.
Another question back here.
I have a question. Historically, live-action movies, especially genre stuff, they start off very strong, but as the franchise goes on, it kind of loses steam and energy. And you guys, with your 4 films, it seems like everyone topped the last one, and it just ended so strong and so powerful. Were you guys conscientious of this, that we have to really, really finish strong with the same energy we started with, because it's really remarkable how the whole thing ended?
Well, thank you for mentioning we have a really high standard for ourselves. Like, there's no reason to go out. Like, again, these movies have such a huge audience, so there's no reason to go out and make another one unless you know you've got something special to bring to the table. So we go through a very rigorous process of like figuring out, if we're going to make another movie, how are we going to surprise ourselves about what we can do with that movie? You know, how are we going to go in a different direction that we've gone in and find something new to say and a new experience for ourselves and for the audience? And that's a really high standard. And again, Marcus and McFeely have been amazing partners in that process with us. And so we spent a lot of time together in a room, day after day after day, month after month after month, just talking about bad ideas, until we get to the right idea. Until we get to a place where we're all excited because something feels fresh. It feels like an idea that we would have never thought of months earlier. And it feels like something that, we're going to be able to do something different on a stylistic level. And also we have to bring, it's like, again, with the actors, we're very conscious of the fact that, like, you're asking these actors to play the same role over and over again. It's like, for them, they're going to do better work if you bring something to them that surprises them and pushes them into a zone with the character that they haven't explored before or even thought of before. So everybody involved in the process, from Marvel to the actors, to the designers, to the audiences, you need to, the harder you work to surprise them about where the storytelling can go, the more benefit you're going to get out of people's creative contributions and also people's responses to the work. So that's basically been our process. And I'm very happy to hear you say that you feel like every movie has gotten better of the 4 that we've made, because every once in a while, someone will just say to me, Winter Soldier is still my favorite movie. For some reason, I love Winter Soldier to death, but that kind of like hurts me a little.
Let's see. Stephanie, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So starting with you.
So using technology with filmmaking, have you at AGBO thought about like an ICO, STO crowdfunding platform in order to initiate more projects for the independent level?
This is a good question. No, we haven't. Something like that. Here's the thing. AGBO's a big company, and sometimes there's things that works there that I don't know about yet. But no, not specifically. But we have taken the approach where AGBO was kind of founded on this concept of ownership, artist ownership of the material. And so our approach to a lot of this stuff has been to run at technology companies that we're interested in and find opportunities for partnership so that we can then sort of create something together. We were both vested in the creation of something.
Right, next question was 2 and 3. Yes.
Hi. This might be a dumb question, but you mentioned the audition process with the studio to try and get the first Marvel movie. What's involved in that? Like, is it treatments? Is it pitching? What do you do?
Okay, so the question was about how did we first get hired by Marvel? What was that process like? So after we heard that we were on this list and we said, yeah, we want to take that meeting, we basically went in cold to a meeting. And it was just a soft meeting about them sort of describing where they're at with Captain America, what they're thinking about, just talking about Marvel in general. And then also, it's basically them getting to know us as filmmakers and us getting to know them in terms of what their more specific agenda, behind the scenes agendas are. That meeting went well. So they said, well, why don't we show you guys the script? They had a script written at that point. And they said, why don't we show you the script? And we'll have another meeting. So we got past the first meeting stage. They to the point where they wanted us to actually read a script. So we had to go, they're very secretive there, so we had to go into their offices, sit, in a room, somebody outside the door, and read the script. And then we did that, and and once we read the script, we came back into the room, had another follow-up meeting, again, where we were just much more specific with idea. And it was more of an idea phase about the actual script, but much more specific about where the story could go, what we were responding to and what they were thinking, where we thought they were missing opportunities with the character. And at that point is when we became very energized about a vision for the movie and a vision for the character. And we became very clear about how we were pitching it. So then they said, okay, why don't you guys take the script and we'll have another meeting, and then we'll go from there. So then now we have the script in hand, so now we can really do some work. And at that point, we began getting very elaborate. We wrote a couple original scenes ourselves. No disrespect to Marcus and McFeely, but we were coming in with our own point of view, and we wanted to show Marvel what that was. We wrote a few original scenes. We storyboarded. We did an animatic where we came up with a montage of images from other movies that was like a tonal sort of image of what we were thinking about for the film. I would say it took us about 2 months, and then we had a meeting after this. So we had 4 meetings in total before they hired us, and it stretched over about 2 months. And I would say over those 2 months, we spent about 90% of our time figuring, working on getting that movie. And the upside of that was during those 2 months, we completely figured the film out. Like, we knew exactly what we were doing with the movie by the end of those 2 months, by the time they hired us, which was great. But I remember right after the 4th meeting, right before they hired us, I came home and I said to my wife, I was like, man, if we don't get this movie, I'm gonna have to rethink my whole career. I don't know. I just feel like we were born to make this movie. It's like, I will not understand it if we don't get this film. Thank God we got it. But yeah, so that was the process. But it was, again, we love Marvel because Marvel's the same way. That first meeting when we came in, they're the kind of company, they'll bring somebody in to talk creatively about what they're doing, And even if there's no chance of, like, we may never have been hireable as directors. They didn't care. They just wanted to sit and talk with us and see what we thought about what they were doing. And just, it's sort of like they go through a really wonderful creative deep dive. They're constantly questioning what they're doing. They're constantly looking. Marvel never gets more excited than when you tell them something they hadn't thought of. That's when they light up. So I really respect our process. It's very collaborative, and it's a nice flow. And we just ended up clicking with them. We got very lucky that like what our sensibilities, our vision, our tone, what we wanted to do with the storytelling, they liked. And that ended up just continuing from movie to movie to movie.
I've got time for just a couple more questions, so I'm going to have to be ruthless. It's just 1, 2. You, sir. Sorry.
So, listening to your story, you started out in indie movie, hard scrabbled your way through, very creative, making films that made no money, to Marvel. Now you're running a studio. What you have to have now financial calculus on choosing to greenlight films. Is that influenced by the past, or you're not interested in the financial calculus, and you're just looking at these things creatively?
That's a really excellent question, and so the question is now that, considering our background as sort of filmmakers and, starting as indie filmmakers, and now we're in a place where we're running a studio, how do we go through the process of deciding what movies to greenlight and how to spend money and just the hardcore stuff of a studio that's not necessarily in our background as filmmakers? And so what we're trying to do is, and that's a question that we're constantly figuring out day to day, to be honest with you. What we're trying to do is two things. On one level, Joe and I want the studio to be driven primarily by passion, artistic passion. So we want to form the entire process there around. We were very clear with our investors when we were setting up with the company that we are never going. They were like, "How many movies are you going to make in a year?" And we're like, "We are never going to tell you that question. We're never going to commit to a certain number of movies a year because we can't. Because that's what every other studio does, and that would be a death knell for us because we want the studio to be we only want to make movies when they're right to make. We never want to have to make a movie that we don't feel like needs to be made. Now that being said, that could be a recipe for a disastrous financial recipe for a movie. So we have partners in the company that we trust a lot that come from the studio side of things, who help us sort of find a balance between those two goals. And it's really just finding that, again, it's really funny because it kind of goes back, this is the same theme I think we've touched on a lot with your question earlier, about, how do you find a way to bring your vision through as a filmmaker when you're working with people who may not understand it or agree with it or whatever the case may be? It's really the same dynamic, it's finding a compromise. I remember when I was in film school, I had a wonderful professor named Ira Deutschman who ran Fine Line for a while, a great film executive. And I remember this one thing that he said, movies are fully 50% art and 50% commerce. And that's the magic to them. And that is the magic to them at the end of the day. You have to honor both sides of that equation. So Agbo is, in its own unique way, is trying to do that.
We have our last question. You gave me that face.
I look so sad.
So sad.
So as a woman who loves Marvel movies and superheroes and all that stuff, for the first kind of phase of Marvel, we didn't see a lot of ourselves represented on screen or off screen, really. And I'm excited for what's coming, but I also just want to know, for you, sitting kind of like on the other side of that, do you have any advice for people who, might be a little different, whether women or people of color, feeling like you're walking into a room where you might be the only one in the room?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I don't know if people in the back could hear, but it was basically about the struggle for diversity in filmmaking, and especially the fact that the Marvel franchise started from a place that wasn't all that diverse, and seems to be in the future moving more in that direction. And has, I think, over the past several years also moved in that direction. So it's a great question, and I think the good news is that feels like a universal collective goal that everybody has. So, when you walk into a room, the good news, it's so funny, because sometimes in the film industry, I remember thinking about this early, because we we were like in the 90s, that big sort of indie phase in the 90s. We kind of came at the very tail end of it. And there was almost a feeling, I think, that I had early on. It's like, oh, we kind of missed that. You know, we missed the sort of peak of that wave a little bit. It was kind of the sense that we missed a missed opportunity. And I think that there's these trends that happen in filmmaking, and like sometimes you miss them, sometimes you're out of sync with them, and sometimes you're in sync with them. And I think what you're asking about right now is like you're perfectly in sync with an awesome wave that's coming that is about diversity. So when you're walking in the rooms, like that's really what people want to hear these days. That's what is exciting everybody. Everybody knows there's been an imbalance. Everybody knows that it's a great road forward to make fresh storytelling. You know, that's part of the exciting thing about that is when you run at diversity, you're giving yourself an opportunity to explore areas of storytelling that haven't been explored well yet. And there's nothing better you can do as a storyteller than that. And arguably on the business side of things, that's can be a huge financial upside because you're bringing something fresh to audiences that way. So I think, you know, the good news is like that wave is happening, and I just think it's going to keep going because you know why? Because the global audience just keeps getting more and more connected, and that's again one thing that my brother and I have really learned through the Marvel movies is like because of the internet, because the way social media keeps developing, it's like the global audience is so connected now, and it's very hard to just you don't exist as an American filmmaker anymore. You know, you're playing on a global stage. You always have, of course, to a degree, but more so than ever. And so that global audience, I think, is going to, because that global audience becomes increasingly more important and will continue to be so forever. Because, by the way, the reason why the global audience is going to keep being important is there are parts of the world, Latin America, Asia, where they have not become saturated with movie theaters yet. Yeah, like they're building theaters every year. Like it is growing there. Like the United States, we always think about, oh, we've stagnated here with movie growth because there's movie theaters everywhere and blah, blah, blah. There's always so many other choices. Well, there's parts of the world where the internet doesn't work as well as it does here, and it will stay like that for a long time, where movie going in many parts of the world is like it used to be back in the 50s in the United States. Like it's critically important to get out of your closet-sized apartment and go somewhere, you know, and watch a movie. Like that's good. That's the lifestyle, and it will stay the lifestyle for many, many decades. So that global audience is going to remain a backbone of cinema for a long time. And television is true for other reasons as well. So anyway, long story short, I'm trying to say is I think diversity in filmmaking is protected now for many, many, many years. So that's the good news.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Anthony, for being here.